this is now kind of the annual talk on Autopsy's year in review. This talk, Autopsy kind of came out of OSDFCon 11. Well, Autopsy came long ago, but Autopsy 3.4, the rebuild, came out of OSDFCon 10, 11 years ago when there was a small group, there's discussions. The idea was, wouldn't it be great if there was a framework and a platform to actually be able to kind of plug modules into instead of a bunch of scripts? And we start off with Autopsy 3, and it's evolved into what it is today. And so this becomes the annual event of what has happened this past year. So basic goals of this is to kind of give you an update on that. There's been 4,000 plus commits on GitHub. So a lot of activity going on with this project and effort. And basically always point out, this is not the Autopsy that you may have seen from 20 years ago, which is the brown tool and things on there that was Linux only and maybe some Mac. It is a wildly different beast. Quick side kind of thing, I just realized, all those images on there, those buttons on there, were designed by this guy, Samir Kapuria, when I was at stake with him. And he made those buttons and tabs for me. He is now president of Norton LifeLock. But anyway, that was kind of a little side thing if he was the guy with the Photoshop or Illustrator back then and made our tabs and buttons for us. So anyway, this is Autopsy 4. This is kind of the layout of what it is now. Every year we have a new thing that we're investigating. It's bad. This year, of course, it is the coronavirus down there on the lower right-hand corner. Meet our dogs. You may have met some of them already, but it's important to kind of refresh our memory on this. Renzik is the Neo Matrix looking guy this year. He's for Autopsy. Hash is the he was Ninja last year. He's for the Sleuth Kit. Next year we'll dress Hash back up, but go something non-black, because there's certainly a black theme going on here the past couple of years. We will figure that out for next year. Also, we have a new member joining the Basis family. Some of you may know Cyber Triage. It started off as an Autopsy module, is now its own thing, but it's tying back in because we're actually using the same database and the same data model now. But it's getting its own dog. This is a sketch. It's kind of a work in progress. He's a bit kind of cyberish with kind of the being assisted by his robotic eyes and arms and various things. So he needs a name. Renzik was actually named many years ago at OSDFCon. He's the subset of Forensic. So submit your ideas on the Cyber Triage Discord channel. If you get picked, we'll give you a free year subscription to Cyber Triage. Some names that I've already heard mentioned, one of which is mine, but I won't tell you which one. There's Rot13. This is a one from way back when I think Renzik we almost used. Io Lassie is one. Psy. Or CT, like Siri, CT. It's a bunch of ideas here. So submit your ideas, get a free license if they get picked. So what's changed in Autopsy since last year? A couple of big themes. One is getting more data, parsing more artifacts to make sure that you have access to as much data as possible. It's always a big theme. But we have a new theme emerging, which is basically showing less data, right? The more and more data we get overloaded with, it's harder to keep up. So we're focusing more now on summarization and creating UIs to summarize the artifacts to give you kind of a quick view on what's going on in a data source, as well as relevance to help you kind of rank data and sort through the noise and focus on the most relevant files first. So we're going to go through a bunch of these today. So I mean, it's an usual fashion that I happened in the past few years, which is to actually go through making a case and adding a data source to give some insight to those who have used Cyber Triage, Autopsy 4 on how it works, and point out what's new and what's different in the process. So step one, make a case, give it a name. Nothing has changed here. You can pick between single and multi-user cases if you've set the multi-user environment with databases and servers, all that kind of stuff. Second, add a data source. Main change here, there's two. One, APFS disk images are now supported. Joe, I think, presented 2 years ago, actually, about Black Bag donation of this to the Sleuth Kit. It's taken a while. We kind of did some refactoring. It's now been in there this past year. There's also the ability to import XRY text file reports using data source processors. Other tools are on the way as well. This basically allow you to import data from other tools into here and use Autopsy as your analytics platform if you want to have a centralized place for all your kind of devices. Second step, after you add that data source in, you configure ingest modules. Ingest modules analyze the files in the data source. They make artifacts. They analyze the artifacts. This is what does all kind of the heavy lifting of the analytics behind the scenes in autopsy. Many of the third-party plugin modules you'll see a bit later on with the contest are examples of these. This is the list on the right-hand side there of the modules that currently exist in the latest release. These red ones all are new or have some changes. Let's go through them briefly. So the recent activity module has been there for ages. It focuses on user activity based on registry, web, all those kinds of things. In the past year, we have expanded Chromium support. Many of you, I'm sure, Edge has now adopted Chromium, which is kind of the back end to Chrome, and a bunch of other browsers do too, Opera, Brave, etc. They all use the same database structure, just different locations. So we've always had Chrome support. We now just look in their locations and parse them so you can get the history and cookies and bookmarks and all those kinds of things. We also have a bunch more Windows artifacts. A lot of these are coming from Redripper. We've been running Redripper for ages as well. You'll hear Harlan talking about later on today. So we've actually just now parsing more of that versus just giving you the raw Redripper output. So there's a bunch of MRU keys on there, doing other things with prefetch, background activity monitor, system resource, a whole bunch of stuff. We'll see later on how we use that. But it's the basic idea of getting more artifacts available, and then we're going to use them to help you give you context about things. Picture Analyzer is a new module. It used to be called EXIF. It's now called more generically Picture Analyzer. As I'm sure you saw before, that list of modules is getting quite long. We're now trying to find ways to reduce them down to make it easier to kind of know what to enable and disable. So we decided to kind of get rid of the very EXIF focused one and make it just be about pictures. And it is now also looking at HEIC images and converting them to JPEG. We could not find a native Java viewer for HEIC images, so we convert them to JPEG. They become more easily viewable, so you will see them as children. So in this example here, do I have a cursor? I do have a cursor. We've chosen an HEIC file. There's two children JPEGs of there, -0 and -1. I think one's a thumbnail. You'll see them both in there as children of that picture. The interesting item module has been there for many years, but it was empty. It came empty. This module basically, you program rules into it, paths, file names, whatever, and it flags those files if you had them. Our users use this to basically automate their investigations some level and like flag when certain files found. We've been talking about it for ages. We finally did it. We released a bunch of sets with for certain rules. So there are now rules automatically to flag cloud storage applications, cryptocurrency wallets, encryption programs, privacy programs like VPNs, etc. We're not going to parse them. There's no special sauce here yet on kind of looking at all the details of the cloud storage, but we just want to make sure that you know it's there so you can look into how it's configured and what's going on. So, for example, cloud storage will flag GoodSync EXE, Google Drive Sync, Google Drive FS, a whole bunch of them. You can see them when you click on the details in the options panel. But again, this is a way of coming out of the box with a bunch of rules automatically. Now, this is an easy way. I always get questions from people like, hey, I don't code. How can I help out? Help maintain these rules, right? We provide this first set of 4 of them. There's a bunch of rules in there. They will become outdated. That's just the reality of this world. You can help out. If you realize there's an app in there that we're not flagging, please submit it. If you think there's a whole another category of apps that you think are relevant and you have a set, contribute them. If you go to the user docs, there is a section that says updating the official interesting file sets right below the translating the UI. That's a lot more work, but it's easy to submit some file sets. And there's rules in there, instructions in there for how to do it. The basic idea is you're going to submit a GitHub pull request or an issue with them in there, and then we'll merge them in. We just appreciate some help with kind of making sure we have the right paths and all that kind of stuff in there. So please help out. The central repository module. This has been rebranded. There's a rebranding theme going on here. This used to be called the correlation engine module. I have a talk this afternoon. The main theme of that is we're doing a lot more with what we call the central repository than just correlation. We'll talk more about that later on. But it's been rebranded to be the central repository module. And what this does is actually put data into the central repository, which is a main database that spans cases. So the main idea of all these changes this past year has been that we want to make sure you're taking advantage of all of your data that you have available. And again, I'll talk more about that this afternoon. But the changes are the repository is now enabled by default. It used to be you had to kind of opt into having it there. We've now made it turned on by default. By default, we are going to send hashes and other identifiers into the central repository for future reference and future use. The change, though, is that we aren't going to correlate by default. It's actually a bug in there I just found the other day, but this, again, the default will change here for the next release. But the basic idea is that some folks have concerns about searching past hash values and making links from this case to that case because it may violate search warrant scope. Get it? That's fine. So by default, we don't want to do that match. So you have full control over what this module does. But we want to make sure that you're storing that data so you can use it, but not make those connections if you don't want to. And the teaser is what we're using this data for is to figure out relevance. And the more times you've seen a file, the less interesting it becomes if you've never tagged it or flagged it. So what we want to do with this data is keep track of it. Again, talk later on about this, but the main idea here is that we're trying to push as much data as possible to the CR. It's small stuff, hash values, identifiers, to help you kind of focus on the relevant stuff in the future. Drone Analyzer and GPX, these are both two new modules. Drone Analyzer came out of our DHS S&T contract that we've had for many years. They actually helped support this conference and support the autopsy training that we did online. It's actually ended, unfortunately, but this module was one of the things that came out of that. It uses DATCon, which is an open source tool to parse the DJI drone data. A bunch of infrastructure work went into autopsy to do this, to kind of build this and mapping and store all the track points and the waypoints, all those kinds of things. So we will parse these things, we'll put them in, and you can then view them in the map viewer, or they're just shown on the left-hand side as part of kind of tracks and routes. We'll also parse GPX files as well to get you some geolocation information as well. iOS Analyzer just came out in this past release a couple of weeks ago. The more complete release is coming out in January. This is a module that wraps Alexis's iLeap, and a bunch of other folks are contributing as well. He is talking about that at the end of the day, about iLeap and ALeap. So you can learn more about that, but there is now an iLeap integration in there. The current version takes a tar file as input. So if you add a tar file of the iPhone in there as a logical file, it'll find that and parse that out. The next version will take in a disk image. Alexis kind of changed some stuff for us so that we can actually query our own database for the paths that he cares about. And then the tool will parse them as part of that. So that was a great integration. More artifacts and ALeap are in. So the next version is really kind of the big part of that. But this would be a great way, I think, to have autopsy be able to get some really broad mobile coverage, taking advantage of other efforts and other frameworks that are out there. So again, Alex's talk the other day covers Alexis's talk. Sorry, talk the other day covers much more, about this. All right, so we've configured ingest modules. There's a whole bunch more ingest modules. We didn't talk about hashing, keyword searching, all those kinds of things. But anyway, we don't have time. They're there. They cover all the basic things you care about. The case opens up. Results are going on behind the scenes. There's background threads running all these modules, doing crazy stuff. Here's the basic flow. The tree on the left-hand side. Sorry, I'm doing this for a screen that I see, but you can't see this. The screen on the left-hand side has got the table of all the results from the artifacts, or the modules that are finding. You choose them, you get the table up here, and then the viewer down on the bottom. What's new on the bottom? So there's new what's called a context viewer. So the bottom area, the bottom right-hand corner always gives you information about something you selected. There's now a new context viewer whose goal is to give you context. So it'll tell you things like, where did the file come from? If the file was downloaded, then we have a web download artifact or a zone identifier file, or it's an attachment to a message that was saved here versus there. It'll tell you that. It'll tell you kind of where its source was. It also has a usage information. So if this file was opened up by Office or Adobe or those MRU keys we talked about before, we'll correlate those MRU keys with these and show you that, hey, this is opened up by Adobe at time X. Or we'll look at prefetch and things and realize, hey, this executable was run at time Y. So we're basically tying in all these artifacts that we have now about usage activity in this location. So if you find this file for whatever reason, you can learn as much as possible about where it came from and how it's used. Again, the amount of data you'll see here will continue to grow as we parse more artifacts, and researchers find other artifacts that we can integrate in. Other viewer. So Autopsy has other viewers that are more focused than the basic 3-pane tree table viewer setup. There's a communications UI, there's timeline, which is a screenshot here, something called image gallery. Let's look at some of the new ones and some updates that have happened in the past year. So one is data source summary. The basic idea here is it's good to have a basic idea of the rough shape of the data you're looking at. If you're just handed a drive or a media card or a phone to look at, to kind of know, where do I start? What's going on in the system? So a year ago, we added in a basic data source summary infrastructure, but it was kind of, it was fairly minimal. It was kind of dipping our toes in the water. The past release added a bunch more. So you can still see it by the cases menu. There's a data source summary menu item up there, but you can now get to it. Again, I'm pointing at the screen, you can't see. But you can now see it in the summary tab. So if you choose a data source, there's a summary tab over here. You can click on that. This is a new tab over there. For many years, it's only been table and thumbnail. Once you choose there's a bunch of different views. Again, don't have a crazy amount of time. This is a short talk. There's a lot to talk about. But here's one example. So there's a types tab on the first one that gives you basic information about what's the operating system. How is it used? There's some logic to figure out. This is a media card or something else, and if there's an OS on there. What's its size? How big roughly is it? What kind of file types are in there? There's a lot of pictures, a lot of videos, a lot of whatever. So this is the basic idea of this panel, to give you some basic idea on kind of what basics do we know about this thing and what's on there. And it's got a pretty graph. Another example, user activity. This is basically going to try and give you an overview on what big picture things did the user do? What were their most common recent programs that they ran on the system? Or what were the most common web domains that they visited? Or what were their recent web searches? Or there's a bunch others on the bottom. What were their most recent USB device IDs, etc. This is all data that's in the tree. It's just a lot more of it. And it's not really organized in more of a way of this kind of quick high-level view. Not everything's in here. That's not the goal. The goal here is really just kind of a figure out like, oh man, they use this app a lot. I got to make sure I look at that app and I don't miss that as part of the investigation. There's also there's a bunch of other tabs on it too. You can poke around if you care and figure that out yourself. It's pretty self-explanatory. Another new UI is called Discovery. This was launched this past year. I believe I mentioned it last year, OSDFCon. We've been working on it for a little bit, but this is kind of a new UI. It's a search navigation UI. Main goal here is to kind of, again, do more ranking and organizing and sorting of things, of not just showing you boatloads of data, but actually making it easier to kind of focus on what's relevant. So here's a screenshot. We'll talk about this a bit more again later on, later today at the 3:30, 4 o'clock, whatever it is, call for there. Basic idea is it shows items in groups. You can choose the group. It shows you the items in there. There's different UIs for pictures versus videos versus documents versus web domains. If there's 5 instances of it, I'm sure we've all come across cases where this person has 10 copies of every picture. You only see one appear, and in that case, you would see 10 rows down here of all the copies of that. But you can just focus on that picture once, see how many copies there are, and then some details below. So again, we'll see more about this later on this afternoon. But the goal of the UI is really to kind of help you find the relevant data faster. So what you do is you pick what you want to see and how you want to see it. So for example, if you want to see pictures that are rare and big, and you can organize them by the parent folder on the theory that similar kinds of things are stored in a similar location. And this can help you focus on, again, maybe high quality pictures or things they took, or whatever. The rare part there, word number 5 there, ties into the central repository, right? We talked before, right? You have this data, you're collecting all of your data, you can at least know if it's been seen before. And even if it's not in the NSRL, if it's been seen by your lab a bunch of times, you can start to ignore it because it's a common web or some other kind of data. Or you can show non-common web domains that were visited in the past 30 days and organize them by visit count. So you can focus on, in the past 30 days, what kind of oddballish web domains was this kind of the user of this actually going to and doing. So again, we'll cover more this afternoon, but the central repository plays a big part in this. There's a Maps UI. This is a new interface that's built in, kind of ties in the geolocation information from EXIF, drone, GPX, Android, iOS, etc. There's a bunch of different artifacts that will have lat-long coordinates on them. This is a way now of viewing them. If you fire this up and you are online, it'll go to Bing and get tiles from there. But you can also use it's an OpenStreetMap based UI. So if you have your OpenStreetMap server, it'll use that. If you have an offline copy of tiles, you can put them in a folder. It can do them there as well. So there are options for both being online using a Bing server or air-gapped environments where you're offline, but you still want to kind of have that geo information. And again, just filtering for kind of what you show, data sources, types, etc. These are all screenshots that came out of the user docs. You can kind of read them as well for kind of more examples. Lastly, on there is online training. This is also a new thing this past year. We've always had a one-day course for autopsy training where we, it's always the day after OSDFCon. It would be tomorrow, where we kind of go over the basics of using autopsy. Last year, we had some funding from USDHS to make it online, to make it available. So it's a feedback request that came out of past OSDFcons. So we did it, we launched it. It is free for US law enforcement still through the end of the calendar year. So you have a month and a half to take advantage of that. You can sign up at autopsy.com/training. It's still commercial for the other folks. As many of you may know, right, who came to this or learned about this event, we did make it free for COVID back in March and April, maybe May, I forget the exact time range. We had 100,000 people sign up for it. It's pretty crazy. But again, kind of shows you the basics of adding and analyzing data. I'm sure we'll expand this in time in the future. But right now, this is the one-day kind of overview class, on autopsy. So that was kind of, again, a very kind of high level kind of overview of what there is in autopsy. There's a lot of details, a lot, again, 4,000 code commits in there. There's a lot that happened in autopsy this past year. But again, the big themes that we're always focusing on are kind of more artifacts around mobile and various other kind of OSs and various apps. So that will be a theme that continues. More on the summarization, on triage. Triage is becoming a big problem for everybody. Everyone's getting more and more devices, and they don't know where to start. So this is going to be a theme that we have as well for that. And more on the ranking, right? On really kind of focusing on getting the relevant data as soon as possible. And to this, we're actually incorporating in some of the scoring technology that we developed for cyber triage, which was, as our IR app, I mentioned it before, that kind of started as an autopsy app and spun off, and now it's kind of coming back and doing more of the same data model. And that's always had this idea of scoring to kind of bring up malicious and suspicious, kind of intrusion-related things for that, that we're bringing that into autopsy as well. So it's going to have more of that concept of being able to kind of, the modules can score things for you and make things aware for you to draw your attention to. So that's kind of the main themes for that. That's the basics. This is kind of actually shorter than I thought it was going to be, but our schedule's a bit tight here before lunch, so this actually all works out very good. Get the latest version of Autopsy from autopsy.com. There's a place you can download it. You can fill a form out and get updates when we make new releases of that. We do quarterly releases. You can get notifications from there or on Twitter. We usually tweet about them. Basis provides commercial support and custom development. That's generally where most of the autopsy stuff comes from, is from basically custom development that our customers are willing to and thankful enough that we can push them out. So we in the community are very appreciative of that. There's my contact info for there. I'm very bad at email, responding back to email, but you can try and maybe I can at least redirect you somewhere else. Or you can connect on LinkedIn or Twitter. Those are down. Actually, they're not there at the bottom, but you can find me, Carrier Forensics, on there. I'm extremely low volume on both. I do Twitter like once a month. I'm really bad with it. So that is that. I am going to, I'm assuming there's questions, but this may be really hard to actually do questions while I'm doing this and not getting sidetracked. So I'll tell you what we're going to do actually is put your questions there. I will check in the Discord channel later on to answer questions about that.